Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. Sad news to report again. This time, the death of Steve Mongo McMichael. Uh, he passed away today at the age of 67 years old from ALS. Mongo has been battling ALS for a number of years. For those of you that are familiar with him, keep up with him as far as like in the wrestling world. Um, you know, watch maybe Conrad did a fundraiser for him. Some of the Four Horsemen like Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, and others. I mean, not Chris Benoit. Sorry, my mistake. Ric Flair, uh, Arn Anderson, Eric Bischoff, and others did a fundraiser for him a couple of years ago when his was made public his battle with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Uh, let's talk a little bit about Mongo. Mongo was born in Houston, Texas. When he was young, his mother got a divorce early on from his biological father, and he was adopted by E.V. McMichael, an oil businessman in Houston. And him and his sisters moved to Freer, Texas, where he grew up. And it was there in high school in Freer that he became a star athlete. He lettered in 6 sports: baseball, basketball, football, golf, and track. 6 different sports. This guy was an amazing athlete. By the time he was drafted, he was initially recruited in baseball. He was a catcher. He was the St. Louis Cardinals were actually looking at him. By the time, but he ultimately went with football. By the time he was drafted in 1980, um, as a defensive tackle in by the New England Patriots, he had 76 um, institutions looking at him in college. So he goes pro in the 80, and he gets cut initially by the New England Patriots, and the Chicago Bears pick him up. And he is on the team of the Chicago Bears when they win the Super Bowl in 1985. He becomes part of that famous Chicago Bears team, coached by Mike Ditka. So the loss of New England's loss and Chicago's gain, and he goes on to win All American and Pro Bowl multiple times in his career, and eventually retires in 1994 as a member of the Green Bay Packers. In 1991, he is responsible for helping the Packers defeat the New York Jets in a famous um, moment where he was responsible for an interception uh, by the Jets. He retires in 1994 from football. He does some broadcasting for a while. But in 1995, uh, he gets the bug to go into professional wrestling. We talked about it in the WrestleMania 11 review. Um, the storyline is Lawrence Taylor is going against Bam Bam Bigelow. So Bam Bam Bigelow has the $1 million corporation, Ted DiBiase's stable, the likes of Nikolai Volkov, King Kong Bundy, Kama, all these guys. So LT needs backup. So LT calls in the football players, Reggie White, Ken Norton Jr., and Steve Mongo McMichael. So one episode in 1995, Mongo is doing, because he did some football commentary, Mongo is doing some commentary, and he gets into a brawl with Kama. And the brawl with Kama, they knock over announce tables. They go into the stands, something you really didn't see on a regular episode of Monday Night Raw back then. And at WrestleMania 11, April the 2nd, 1995, he accompanies Lawrence Taylor to the ring as Lawrence Taylor's All-Pro team. Well, they really were impressed by his commentary in WWF, but they didn't pick him up in WWF. Who ends up picking him up is WCW. WCW is launching their new show, Monday Night Nitro, as competition to Monday Night Raw, and Eric Bischoff wants a new Jesse Ventura. What Jesse Ventura was in the 1980s and how Jesse Ventura revolutionized color commentary, he felt like Mongo could do the same thing. Even though Mongo had no experience other than that one little time in WWF calling professional wrestling, he felt like Mongo could do it. So here you have a guy. He's won two Pro Bowls, two times All American, and he is a Super Bowl champion going into the wrestling. You know, he comes out with his dog Pepe, and the banter initially between himself and Bobby Heenan is pretty funny. And he's basically a baby face. You know, there's that one episode where William Refrigerator Perry shows up, the same episode in '95 where Medusa threw the woman's title in the trash. And they're old friends from the Chicago Bear days. So they have a brief interaction. But unbeknownst to a lot of people, Mongo is training in the power plant to be a wrestler. Terry Taylor is training him. So they come up with the storyline where Elizabeth has just turned heel. She turned on the Macho Man at Super Bowl VI. And she's out there, her woman and the Four Horsemen are out there taunting Deborah, Steve's wife, Deborah McMichael. Flair was flirting with her. And Mongo takes exception to this. So he recruits the services of Carolina Panthers at that time, Kevin Green. So he and Kevin Green, one current football player, one ex-football player, are going to wrestle Arn Anderson and Ric Flair at the Great American Bash 1996. And in storyline, they have the Macho Man training them, and the Macho Man is going to be in their corner, and Bobby Heenan is going to be in the corner of Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. So they have the match, and Mongo does pretty good, you know. The Horsemen, Arn Anderson and Ric Flair, they do a lot to put him over, to make him not look so bad. So he gets a Halliburton briefcase, and there's money in it, and he uses it to clobber Kevin Green, and they lose the match, but Mongo is the fourth horseman. Because initially Brian Pillman was a horseman, but Brian Pillman left WCW to go to ECW, so they need a fourth horseman, so they got Mongo. And from there, Mongo begins his wrestling career. And he has his first singles match at Bash at the next pay-per-view, Bash at the Beach 1996 against Joe Gomez. And he doesn't do so well. You know, it's very hard for him because they put him in the Four Horsemen, honestly, because Ric Flair liked to party with him. It was really weird because the Horsemen was usually this elite group, this elite group of guys that, you know, in wrestling, you know, you had Ole Anderson, you had Barry Windham, those types of individuals. But Mongo wasn't that. And I guess they thought that they could, you know, guide him to a great wrestling career, but it never really panned out for him. He did win in 1997. He did win the United States Championship from Jeff Jarrett, because Jeff Jarrett leaves the WWF and goes to WCW. And he wants to be, he's like Jeff Jarrett is like a mini Ric Flair. He wants to copy Ric Flair's mannerisms, right? They do the strut and everything similar, and he wants to join the four horsemen. Steve Mongo McMichael, David. He was in WCW as a as a wrestler, and he was in the Chicago. He was on the Chicago Bears uh, and the Green Bay Packers as a football player. He was a football player in the NFL from 1980 to 1994, and he was a wrestler from 1995 to 1999. He was the husband of Deborah. You know Deborah. You know puppies. He was the original husband of Deborah. Deborah came in as Deborah McMichael. Um, Before she was in the WWF, she was in WCW, and she was Steve McMichael's wife. And a lot of his feuds revolved around him, especially after she turned on him. Her getting other charges like Jeff Jarrett, Alex Wright. No, I know, but yeah, yeah, that Deborah. But before she was married to Steve Austin, she was married to this man, Steve McMichael. So she was married to two guys named Steve, two Steves, right? And it was it was Steve McMichael who brought her into professional wrestling, because when he turned heel at the Great American Bash 1996, she was his manager. But then eventually she turned on him, and she managed the likes of Alex Wright. She managed who was you know uh, Jeff Jarrett, who he won the U.S. championship from, and a few others. You know, Jarrett came in '96. He wanted to join the Horsemen. There was already four Horsemen, so he couldn't join them. So him and Mongo get into a feud eventually over Deborah, and Deborah turns on Mongo and actually sides with Jeff Jarrett. When Jeff Jarrett leaves the WCW to go back to the WWF in late '97, he he cuts a promo and he says, he's talking the shit about Eric Bischoff. He's like, Eric Bischoff put me with a bimbo and an ex-football player who couldn't even lock up. And he's talking about McMichael. Like I said, Steve McMichael wasn't that skilled. He wasn't a great announcer and he wasn't a great wrestler, but he liked to party and people liked to have him around, especially Ric Flair. So that's why he was a member of the Horsemen. He got into one of the first time with Goldberg, the first time that Goldberg in late '97 had any kind of a challenge to him, like a major opponent that he wrestled both at World War III and at Starrcade, was Steve McMichael. Goldberg actually stole Steve McMichael's Super Bowl ring in storyline, and he was basically one of Deborah's hired guns against Steve. and McMichael hit him with a lead pipe and eventually got it back. So he actually, during Goldberg's streak, he didn't beat Goldberg, but he actually did get the best of Bill Goldberg. He was in War Games. He was in War Games 1997 with the Horsemen. He wrestled his former Green Bay Packers teammate, Reggie White, at Slamboree 1998. That was a very interesting match. You got two football players. Neither one can really wrestle. But he was really uncoordinated in the ring, not great on the mic either. But like I said, people just like to have him around. You know what I mean? And I guess that's why he was he lasted so long in wrestling. In football, besides besides being in the NFL, he also was part of the CIFL as a coach in 2000. Yes, yeah, we mentioned that, David. Steve McMichael was a. We mentioned that he was an announcer in the first Nitro. He was also in the Arena Football League, the CIFL, as the head coach of the Chicago Slaughter. So eventually, he returns to football after he had his last match in WCW in 1999. He came back. It was a six-man tag. He and Chris Benoit took on Kurt Hennig and Stevie Ray. After taking time off after the British Bulldog broke his hand, he, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko defeat Kurt Hennig, Barry Windham, and Wrath. And that was the end of him. But a lot of WCW wrestlers came together for a fundraiser for him after it was discovered that he was battling ALS. He did make one last appearance as a referee in TNA in 2008. 2021, he announced that he was diagnosed with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. He was influential in the ALS Foundation. And he even ran for mayor of Romeoville, Illinois. So he lost though, but he was beloved in the state of Illinois just because of the Super Bowl he brought home. So rest in peace to Mongo McMichael. In addition to being known as Mongo, he was also known as Ming the Merciless. So he got a lot of his football names from Flash Gordon, the series, the Flash Gordon TV show. But I remember him most from wrestling. Like I said, he wasn't a great wrestler, but if it was for him, we wouldn't have never known about Deborah. He introduced the world to Deborah. She then went on to the WWF, where she hooked up with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Like David said, she became Stone Cold Steve Austin's wife. So much like a lot of other wrestlers, they introduced their wives into the wrestling business, their wives or girlfriends, and those wives or girlfriends, Mark Merrill's another example, Kurt Angle's another example. They introduced their wives or girlfriends into the wrestling business, and their wives or girlfriends end up hooking up with another wrestler, and they end up losing them. I saw, like in 2001, he was already gone from wrestling. I saw this thing with McMichael said, how Stone Cold Steve Austin stole my wife. you know? Peace, guys. Thank you, David, for contributing. Rest in peace to Steve Mongo McMichael. My favorite feud with him was the feud with Jeff Jarrett in '97 over the United States Championship. Kevin Green, his tag team partner / opponent, also passed away in 2020. We have a video on the channel about him. WCW used to love to bring athletes into, especially Chicago-based athletes, not only McMichael, but also bring Dennis Rodman in. They love to bring in these guys into the wrestling arena. So if you think that Travis Scott is the first celebrity to ever wrestle in a major and be involved in a major angle in professional wrestling, you're dead wrong. You had the likes of Mongo, you had the likes of Kevin Green, Carl Malone, Dennis Rodman, Jay Leno, Cyndi Lauper. Wrestling has always done this. You know what I mean? So I don't know why fans are really upset now. It's nothing new. Anyway, rest in peace to Mongo McMichael.